Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we've made it to the final installment of my Battle for Azeroth / Shadowlands rewrite. Thus far, we've extended the faction war to be its own entire expansion, expanded Nazjatar and Ny'alotha to be their own entire expansion, and now we're at Shadowlands itself, which will mostly cover the same broad concept, but changed to be more betterer. And I'm going to issue my periodic reminder that writing for a huge ongoing game with different restrictions and needs is a lot more difficult than me taking an already existing story and critiquing it. So I'm not making any claims that I could have done a better job than the original team. And I'm not going to be touching Dragonflight because aside from some minor gripes, I think that it turned out pretty good. Besides, BFA and Shadowlands were kind of their own era of the lore, so this will make for a good stopping point. Shadowlands gets a lot of hate from the fandom, like an obscene amount. It's often cited as the worst WoW expansion, which to be clear, isn't in and of itself that much of a dig because every WoW expansion has been great, some just less so than others. But I'm being genuine when I say that I really like Shadowlands. I love the gameplay, I love the world building. Really, it was just the main plot that bothered me, but even then, much less so than BFA's did. But it'll become self-evident as we work through this rewrite just what I was and wasn't a fan of. We start things off largely the same, with Sylvanas arriving at the footsteps of Icecrown Citadel. Through her brief glimpse into the Shadowlands when she died after ICC, and her interactions with Helia, she knows more about the Realm of Death than most characters, and she doesn't like what she's seen. But one useful bit of info she's acquired is a way to access that realm. She and Bolvar have their duel in front of the Frozen Throne. Perhaps she's brought some foot soldiers of her own to counteract his, but she isn't empowered by the jailer in this version. I think it's perfectly reasonable that she would be able to best Bolvar in a 1v1, and didn't understand the complaints at the time. Bolvar isn't Arthas, and I can't imagine he actually had a ton of fans. Nor did he have any grandiose feats suggesting he's ultra powerful. I believe it was stated that even Arthas would lose in a 1v1 against Lei Shen since a lot of his danger lied in the Scourge. Anyway, after a hard-fought fight, she does wrest the Helm of Domination from his head and pull it apart like a bag of potato chips, shattering the glass ceiling. She then makes her entry into the Shadowlands. Bolvar reaches out to the Alliance, informing them of what has transpired. Naturally suspicious of anything that Sylvanas could be plotting, they put together a strike team to accompany Bolvar and the Ebon Blade as they venture into the Shadowlands. Most notable among this team is his daughter, Talia, though perhaps she'll remain discreet about her presence until they're already there. On the Horde side, Nathanos and Kalia explain the situation to Vol'jin, as Sylvanas has informed them of her plans and left them in charge of the Forsaken while she investigated. Though frustrated by the Banshee Queen making such bold moves on her own, they decide that it behooves them to send reinforcements through the Veil, and so a strike team of their own is formed, notably including Bane Bloodhoof. Yes, I know, that Bane. We fly through the Veil atop Icecrown and wind up, well, I'm not entirely sure. The top of Torghast does make for a striking visual, but I think I'm tentatively gonna say we wind up crashing into Bastion. See, I want to tweak something that has always bugged the heck out of me in Shadowlands. Remember how I wanted to mush Zandalar and Kultiris together so that the gameplay wasn't split between two continents in BFA? Well, Shadowlands was even worse, with every zone other than the Maw and Korthia functioning as their own islands. Does it kind of make sense given that each afterlife is its own community and that there are an infinite number of them? Yeah, sure, but is that fun to play within? Not really. I have to assume they were designed that way as a matter of convenience. It's likely a fair deal easier to make a bunch of separate zones than to have to stitch them together. But I don't care, that's lame. So I would stitch them together. Specifically, I would arrange the zones semi-vertically in a bit of a spiral/cone thing. The Maw would be the bottom of this drain, and as you climb the spiral, you would reach increasingly more pristine zones. Bastion, the most heavenly feeling, would be on top. Then Ardenweald, the lush forest. Then Maldraxxus, the bony militaristic zone. Then Revendreth, the zone where grave sinners are given their last chance at penitence. And lastly, the Maw itself. This would be reminiscent of a Divine Comedy style layout of the afterlife, with things getting more magnificent the higher you go, and more dismal the lower you go. Travel between the zones would still be restricted by natural barriers and by the personnel of each covenant, so that souls could not freely travel between them on their own whims, but travel by foot for us would be totally possible. So we land in Bastion and are discovered by Clea and the gang. There hasn't been a stopping of souls like in the original. The Arbiter isn't broken, but there has been an anima drought. Either way, our arrival is still quite peculiar, as we arrived on our own instead of being ferried by a Kyrian. Also, we're alive. But regardless, we find ourselves helping out Bastion with a lot of their local problems as we search for Sylvanas. This includes the plotline of Devos and Uther having cast Arthas' soul into the Maw and rebelling against the Archon. Eventually, we descend into Ardenweald, where, again, anima is sparse. And of course, we save Ysera because that was one of the best quest chains ever. But again, no Sylvanas. Conveniently situated halfway down the Shadowlands spiral, though, we can find Tazavesh, the Veiled Market, where these strange broker characters are more than willing to accommodate guests to the realm, provided there would be a financial incentive for them. And here's a bit of a peek behind the veil of the production of this video. I actually scripted it out before we knew that Tazavesh was being brought back for patch 11.2. But I don't think that critically changes anything that I had planned out. The reasons for wanting to use Tazavesh instead of Oribos are obvious. Nobody wanted to spend 2 years in an airport. And Tazavesh clearly has a more interesting environment that can accommodate all of the functions of a city, and as a hub for merchants, rumors, and information. It is here that at long last we managed to locate Sylvanas. Unfortunately for Bolvar and the Alliance, they can't exactly use force against her while being guests in the broker's city. But she does explain the situation to us at this point, some of which she already knew, and some of which she's pieced together since arriving here. Things may seem relatively fine so far, but at the depths of the realm of death is a place whose denizens have nothing to await but their eternal punishment. A fate worse than anything they could accomplish in their mortal existences. And she wishes to change this. The Alliance scoff that she merely wants to save her own hide, as she is surely bound for such a fate. She doesn't much care what they have to say, and suggests to the Alliance that if they don't want to help her, that they should occupy themselves helping the Shadowlands with another problem, the anima drought. We continue downward into Maldraxxus, and to be quite honest, I'm not sure how much I'd keep and change. The Primus would be there right away, as I wouldn't bother with the whole Runecarver plot, and his presence would also mitigate a lot of the infighting between the houses that the original plot had. I suppose Draka can still be our familiar character for the zone. I never cared much about her, especially since we see AU Draka back in Warlords of Draenor, but I do have one friend who really loves her female orcs, so I suppose there is a fanbase there. Otherwise, there was also Vosh and Alexandros. But I do think I'd avoid the stuff with Kel'Thuzad. I feel like Shadowlands did his story no favors. And let's make better use of the other Margraves. Sindane, Crexus, and Garmal all have pretty cool designs, but did relatively little. Especially Crexus, who got into the high-quality sizzle reel and then died 5 minutes into questing. Next, we venture into Revendreth, and at first, things look as dire as in the other zones, but the more of a peek we get behind the curtain, the more we realize they're not actually suffering from a drought at all. See, while each zone can produce its own anima, Revendreth has always served as the metaphorical grain lands, extracting the most through its torture rituals and funneling its excess to the other realms. In recent years, Denathrius has put on the show of suffering from the mysterious drought like everyone else, but was secretly hoarding the stuff. After all, they produce the anima, why shouldn't they have their fill of it? When we manage to unveil the plot with the aid of Prince Renethal, Sire Denathrius takes care of matters by tossing us into the Maw. In the Maw, we see just how dire things can be, and it would function differently from the other zones. I have a whole video discussing how great I think the Maw actually is as a zone. At any rate, we have some harrowing encounters with the Mawsworn, and even Zoval himself, but we manage to evade capture, possibly with the aid of Venari. Thankfully, as we are not yet deceased, and yes, please hold your actualies, Forsaken and Death Knight players, we are not strictly bound to the Maw. Through some daring strategy, we manage to escape from the Maw and make our way back to Tazavesh. At this point, we're presented with the Covenant choice, which I would make more about the perks and flavor, and mostly divorced from player power. Though, changing Covenants would now be a much more laborious process. Ain't no taking it easy on traders here. The initial raid would still be Castle Nathria, as Denathrius poses the most immediate threat to the Shadowlands. It would largely play out the same, though perhaps we manage to beat him back into being cooperative, and don't need to fully oust him. It doesn't really matter, but I do think it'd be more fun to keep him around. Anyway, in the process of doing so, we manage to free Kael'thas Sunstrider, who then becomes our familiar character for Revendreth. You could then have Lorthamar visit Revendreth, as it was established that he was still hung up about Kale's betrayal. But I also don't wholly think it's necessary. Like, Kale had a good Shadowlands story all on his own. You just have to modify it with Kel'Thuzad's absence in mind. I suppose Lor'themar does need any characterization he can get that isn't just being Thelystra's man. Actually, Dragonflight established that you can have characters stand in for someone in the Shadowlands, so maybe just trade in our Lor'themar and get a Kael'thas? Seems like a good deal to me. I'm kidding. Mostly. Now then, one element that Shadowlands whiffed on was only showing us 5 afterlives when supposedly there are an infinite number of them. Granted, it's presumed that these were the major ones where a large percentage of souls go. Even so, I think it would behoove us to explore at least a few more. So in patch 10.0.5, we would get our 6th afterlife, which could be named whatever, but let's just go with the Ancestral Lands. Think of this as a fairly grassy, savanna-like zone with perhaps a few pockets of woodland. A perfect destination for anyone whose culture heavily adhered to the reverence of one's ancestors, and whose lifestyle involved lots of spiritualism, respect for the elements, and hunting. But like, different from Ardenweald hunting. A lot of orcs and Tauren would wind up going here. Probably a fair number of trolls too. We wind up meeting Cairn here, who serves as our familiar character. Apparently, the Tauren Heritage quest implied he and his life mate were still hanging around Azeroth to watch over Bane, but that's easily changed. To be honest, it's difficult for me to know what to do with Bane. I just have absolutely no respect for the character. Even with me having rewritten most of his pathetic BFA activity away, it's really hard to think of a narrative for him. Actually, Dragonflight established you can have characters stand in for someone in the Shadowlands, so maybe just trade in our Bane and get a Cairn? Seems like a good deal to me. Fine, I'll try. Bane has been consistently characterized as striving for peace, forming friendships of sorts with both Anduin and Jaina. In a sense, this could be considered admirable. But you know what Bane never has been? Fun. I think the routines of those living in the Ancestral Lands is a very tranquil one. Yes, they hunt for most of their meals. Yes, they're probably quite nomadic, but they enjoy it. They savor taking down their prey, and they love not being tied down to one specific spot. They are free to go where the wind guides them. Well, within the zone at least. It'll be a big zone, okay? Cairn's big lesson for his son will be to let go and relish life a bit. Even if they may be at war with the Alliance, there are joys to be had. The Ancestral Lands are beautiful, but so is Mulgore, so is Kalimdor, and in that vein, the 10.0.5 dungeon could be us venturing into a particularly dangerous cavern to participate in a hunt of the zone's most fearsome game. Think Wailing Caverns, but more spacious and with more sunlight shining in. We can call it the Caverns of the Great Hunt. Now, you may be wondering where exactly this zone is, since I didn't describe it earlier. Is it just floating in the in-between? Well, it could be, but I like to imagine any afterlife that grows enough in population would sort of automatically attach itself to the Shadowlands spiral. This may not, lore-wise, be a permanent fixture, and though it would certainly have a leader of its own, that leader would not necessarily have to be added to the Eternal Ones. At any rate, the Ancestral Lands would probably be smushed up between Ardenweald and Maldraxxus, I suspect. And screw it, let's get a Maldraxxus mini-raid. 2 or 3 bosses. The House of the Chosen had a great environment. Have Vyraz attempt his coup with Garmal's aid. Vyraz dies, Garmal gets reined in, that's it. Moving on. We get a similar experience in patch 10.1, where yet another afterlife rises to prominence. This would be, let's call it the Automa Kama, which is going to be us repurposing the desert sections and all of the robotic life forms of Zereth Mortis. I'm not strictly against the existence of Zereth Mortis, but I think it was really premature of us to go to a location locked away even further beyond than the Shadowlands themselves. But it was still a cool location. I'd cut out most of the green sections just for aesthetic cohesion. It would also just exude near automata vibes. This would be the ideal destination for those who best fit a life of routine and guidance, who don't deal well with the exertions of constantly thinking, those who want to almost behave according to a program, like an android. It's not quite the same as Bastion, as the Kyrian are more about duty and active servitude. It's the kind of culture that Sylvanas would likely disapprove of, as the Automa would essentially have their free will stripped away from them. But I do think there would be souls that would be at peace here. You know, the kind of people who really enjoy hypnosis, brainwashing, and bimboification videos. I'm not locked into any specific familiar character to throw in here. The likely candidates would be anyone who is a lackey or otherwise subservient, particularly former cultists, and I'd prefer an Alliance character to balance things out. The two best options I came up with were Rakeesh, Velen's son, and Soulbinder Nyami from Alkandun. And neither of those two are very major characters, but I'm sure there's somebody better that I'm forgetting. Anyway, with all of the desert and mechanical assets that we had from Zereth Mortis and the Sepulchre of the first ones, I'm sure we could throw together a fun enough raid still. It wouldn't need to be 11 bosses, and Sepulchre already has a bunch that could fit. We'll call it Sepulchre of the Subservient. Yeah, lots of subbies in there. What? I'm not sure where this zone would attach, because my instinct would say above Maldraxxus and below the Ancestral Lands or Ardenweald, but that puts two zones in the middle there. Maybe Ancestral Lands would make sense above Ardenweald then. Why am I worrying about this? 10.1.5 would then introduce Korthia. Look, I know Korthia gets a ton of hate, but I think it's widely undeserved. Yes, it's gray and brown, but it's also really beautiful in a way. Quite forlorn. Obviously, giving it the moniker City of Secrets when there are like two buildings was a really weird call, but it was a perfectly fine patch zone. I also don't think it really fits as an afterlife per se. It can just be a place that exists for wildlife and unaffiliated denizens of the Shadowlands, and which the Devourers tend to inhabit. It could either be a floaty island due to its sparse population, or it could be sandwiched in somewhere as an incidental result of two other zones smushing their mountains together. I do think one important secret could be uncovered here though. Sylvanas learns the nature of how a soul's destination afterlife is determined, which would be something not widely known as you're in a dormant state while being ferried around, and the Kyrian either don't talk about it or don't understand it themselves. It would function just as it does in the real version, with the Arbiter being located in the sacred city of Oribos, where she reads all of their life in an instant and sorts them into their most fitting afterlife. Sylvanas is revulsed at this revelation. The theme of her whole character and the theme of this expansion are free will, and the way the Shadowlands works now deprives everyone of the most important choice of all. Sylvanas has always valued her freedom above all else. The freedom to be with a human that most of Quel'Thalas looked down on, and freedom from the domination of her murderer, Arthas. For souls to be condemned to whatever afterlife someone else deems they belong in is a massive injustice to her, no matter how wise this Arbiter may be, and she wishes to change this broken system. That being said, our source here cannot be substantiated, and stopping the jailer is already on the agenda, so we have to put a pin in this news for now. And maybe we learn all of this in a patch dungeon. Also, just because I don't know where else to put this, at some point Bolvar and Talia have their interactions and start to bond. As in the original, she is upset that he did not reach out to her sooner, but comes to understand his reasoning. It's highlighted how Bolvar has lived a life of sacrifice. He sacrificed the opportunity to see his daughter grow up in order to protect her from the Scourge, and sent her to Kul Tiras to be raised. He sacrificed his freedom to become the Lich King. He laments that he had no choice but to make these decisions for the greater good. She reminds him that he always had a choice, and she hopes that in the future he chooses his own happiness for once. 10.2 finally features our assault on Torghast. As I stated in its own dedicated video, I think the roguelike gameplay of Torghast was great, but would have been better served in a more diverse environmental structure. So the tower itself is now freed up for other uses, and I'd make 2 dungeons and a raid out of it, utilizing elements out of the 6 regular wings as well as the adamant vaults. The lower dungeon we can call Skoldus Hall, and would be where Uther's story comes to a culmination. Regretful of how he damned his own student's soul, he's determined to set things right and retrieve Arthas' soul from the Maw, so it can be properly judged, and it is here that he manages to do that. I wouldn't really have Arthas interact back at all. Perhaps his soul is in no condition to do so right now, and I think he's a character best left mostly in the past. This is Uther's story, after all. The upper dungeon we can call Mortregar, and I don't really have any specific narrative for this one. The raid itself would be the Sanctum of Domination, slightly spruced up with the harvested assets, and with Zoval serving as the final boss. We manage to defeat him, at which point the truth is unveiled to us. First of all, he's not really a bad guy. Like Hades in Greek mythology, he just gets a bad rap because of his job. Second of all, he actually raised the same complaint about the Arbiter sorting system that Sylvanas has beef with. As the one in charge of punishing and jailing the damned, he was actually the one who most wanted to spare as many people that fate as possible. But the other Eternal Ones would not hear his pleas, as this is simply the way it has always been and must always be. He says that if we're willing to stand with him, he will bring us to Ouroboros himself, so that we can fix this broken machine of death. We agree. I should also add that as the expansion has gone on, we'd have the Ancestral Lands and the Automa Kama Covenants added as options, and now we gain the Mawsworn as yet another. And so, with patch 10.3, we launch our assault on Ouroboros, which, just to be cheeky, let's call it the City of Secrets. I do think Ouroboros has some strong design elements if you add more stairs and take out the teleportation. It's just not strong enough to serve as a capital, but as a raid environment, it's completely fine. I'm not sure what all bosses I would throw in or how long it would be. I've never been of the mind that last raids need to be huge, but if you are of that mind, it would be a tricky one to pull off. Anyway, the final fight would take place against the Arbiter herself. I wouldn't really have her be evil either. She's just doing her job as best she can, and is a bit fixated on it, and understandably wouldn't stop just because some intruders burst in and demanded that she do so. The heroes, led by both Sylvanas and Bolvar, realize that they may need to put her down to accomplish their goal. Similar to how Pelagos did in the original, someone will need to rise to the occasion and take her place. Bolvar contemplates doing so himself. He practically did the same move at the end of ICC when he decided to become the new Lich King. Yet Talia's words to him cause him to hesitate. Sylvanas speaks up before he can commit to it, and solemnly volunteers herself. Bolvar is stunned and asks why she would do such a thing after going through so much effort to spare herself a similar fate. She explains to him that what truly matters to her has never been her fate itself, but the freedom to choose that fate for herself. He acknowledges her choice, and asks if there's any message she would like to leave behind with him. She shakes her head, stating that everything she would need to say has already been said. As the battle reaches its climax, the Arbiter begins to falter, and Sylvanas prepares to take on the mantle. Before she can do so, however, Zovaal manages to push through with his reinforcements and saves the day. He impresses upon the weakened Arbiter that a new machine of death shall be implemented, whether or not she agrees to it. It's her choice whether she wants to be a part of it or be destroyed. She finally relents, and the new process is put into place. Every soul she receives shall be sorted into only 2 groups. There are the bulk of souls who will now have a choice of which afterlife they wish to experience, perhaps even after trialing with each of them, and there are those bound for Revendreth for their last chance at redemption. If incapable of that, they are cast into the Maw, but the redeemed then receive the same choice that other souls were presented with. Bolvar and Sylvanas have one final conversation atop Icecrown before parting ways. He apologizes for misjudging her, and states his intention to make up for lost time with his daughter. Sylvanas admits that she was wrong about him as well. He was worthy to wear that crown, but she thinks it's for the best that he no longer need to. On that, he admits he agrees. They head back to their respective homes, and the shattered veil above Icecrown is sealed once more. Now, I understand if you think Sylvanas not actually having to follow through with the sacrifice is a cop-out, but I think the story is stronger with her in it. That being said, if you were to write her off, I think that would be a decent way of doing it. And that's that. The entirety of my BFA/Shadowlands rewrite. Is it perfect? By no means. But it was a fun writing exercise for me. I think it's at least better than what we got, which again is only because I had the much easier task of modifying an existing story than crafting a fresh one, but I'm certain there are even better versions out there. This one just happens to be mine. For this week's drawing, I decided to go with the Arbiter, as in my version, she is the final raid boss of the expansion. And I really like the idea that she's not this malevolent force. She's just doing her job. Maybe it's even this fun little game for her, like she just loves sorting, and she's really good at it. We all have our fixations after all. And I think it'd be a funny, almost cute moment if after we decide to rework the system into only 2 categories, she's a bit disappointed because it's too easy now. Either way, she's got a cool enough design, but I feel like she was horribly underutilized in Shadowlands. Like, right off the bat, she's broken, and then she just eventually gets replaced by Pelagos. Funnily enough, when we first heard about the Arbiter, my first thought was, yeah, Sylvanas is going to be the new Arbiter. Clearly that idea didn't actually happen, but as you can see, it worked its way into my rewrite. And of course I set her in Ouroboros, because where else would she be? And I really like how the background turned out for this one. I think I got pretty lucky in managing to emulate the swirling of souls that goes on around her. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. I don't have any more rewrites planned for now, so next week we're back to random topics again. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye.